ready. Good evening. I would like to call to order the February 10th, 2025 Lake Washington School Board meeting. Let the record reflect that 4 school board members are present in person. We have one joining us online, and we've got one student representative, LSU, with us this evening. The board values public participation and engagement in the meetings of the board. Board meetings will continue to be live streamed on the LWSD website and are available for viewing following the conclusion of the board meeting as well. Public are always welcome to email the board at boardmembers@lwsd.org. The first item on our agenda this evening is our land acknowledgement. Director LaLiberty.
Thank you. The Board of Directors of Lake Washington School District acknowledges that our district is on the indigenous land of the Coast Salish peoples, who have reserved treaty rights on this land, including the Duwamish and the Snoqualmie Indian tribe. We thank these caretakers of this land who have lived here since time immemorial. We commit to continue collaborating with our Native community to teach the indigenous history of this land and these local tribes to all children of the district. We also commit to provide the best possible education for all children of Native descent who attend our schools. Thank you.
Thank you. I will now entertain a motion to approve the February 10th, 2025 agenda.
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved by Director LaLiberty and seconded by Director Yoakum to approve the agenda as presented. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, hearing none, motion carries.
Mark's audio is a little quiet.
Can we increase the audio for Mark? Thank you. The first item on our agenda is a recognition for our teachers who have earned their national board certification. Dr. Holman.
Yes, and this is always one of the most exciting recognitions because this truly is a demonstration of the commitment that our staff has to ongoing professional learning. I've done a lot in my career. What I have not done is go through the national board certification process, and so it is a rigorous process. Tonight we have 9 first-time certificate earners. We have 11 maintenance certificate earners, and that just demonstrates that ongoing commitment ultimately to kids. And so tonight our Director of Professional Learning, Emily Young, is here to honor our recipients.
Thank you. First, we'd like to say thank you to Superintendent Holman and to the board for having us here today to honor this year's National Board Certified Teachers in Lake Washington School District. We would also like to thank our partners at LWEA for hosting our wonderful refreshments at our reception, and to our audience and friends and family members for joining us to celebrate the incredible group of educators we have here with us today. National Board Certification is the highest level of professional certification available in education. It is not just another piece of paper. It is a journey that educators choose to embark on in order to reflect and grow, deeply examine student learning, and challenge themselves to perform at the very highest levels. National Board Certification represents a deep dedication to continuous improvement and professional excellence. Every educator who completes national boards, myself included, will tell you that the process is, as Dr. Holman spoke to, incredibly rigorous. It takes 1 to 5 years to complete and requires extensive portfolio development, videos of yourself teaching, which are very challenging to watch back and reflect on, as well as deep analysis of one's own teaching practice. In support of this work, Lake Washington is lucky to have 2 amazing National Boards facilitators, Julia Vasiliauskas and Danielle Lancaster. Julie is here with us tonight to help present awards to our incredible honorees. I will welcome her up here to the podium to help announce each of the educators we are celebrating here tonight. After she announces you, if you could come up here and we'll give you your award and ask that you stay up here for a moment so we can take a group photo in your honor.
All right, this is the best part of my job after watching so many of you struggle and learn and become even better, effective educators. I'm so happy to be celebrating this with you. So first up, Shannon Fisher, who is certifying in Exceptional Needs Specialist, Early Childhood to Young Adulthood. Yes. Yeah. Jennifer Hahn, certifying in mathematics and early adolescence. Yasal Jung, certifying in English as a new language, early childhood to middle childhood. Deborah Sullivan, certifying in Exceptional Needs Specialist and in Early Childhood to Young Adulthood. And then among our next group of educators, we have a couple of our current National Board Certified teachers who did their maintenance of certification. Maintenance of certification is the way that NBCTs renew their certification every 5 years. They have to re-show their dedication and effectiveness and their reflection practices. Jillian Stroop, recertifying in literacy, reading, language arts, and early childhood to middle childhood. And Caitlin Vaught, recertifying as a generalist in early childhood.
Thank you very much. We will go ahead and move on to the next item on our agenda this evening, which is public comment. The Board of Directors of Lake Washington School District welcomes the public to the business meetings of the board and encourages community engagement. The board dedicates 30 minutes to hear from the public during the public comment period of the meeting, with each individual provided up to 2 minutes to speak. Participants should not expect a response from the board at the end of their comments, as we dedicate this time to listening to your voice and would like to get as many members of the public an opportunity to speak as time allows. All right, I believe we only have one person signed up tonight. It's Alex Lee from Cascadia College. Come on up, Alex.
Couple updates at Cascadia College. First, we'd love you to join us on February 26th to celebrate our 25th anniversary. We're throwing a party on campus, and you should have received an invitation, or if you haven't, you'll receive one soon. Our enrollment continues to grow. We'll have more specifics, including the running start distributions, probably at the next time I'll be able to come to the meeting. And we anticipate, our anticipated new building made the capital budget list, which is very exciting. We're looking to break ground this summer if it stays on the list throughout the legislative session. And one last note, we have passed policy on January 15th to help protect our students who are not U.S. citizens in line with Washington state laws. Our employees are being trained in the coming weeks as federal immigration efforts are increased. So thank you.
Thank you very much. The next item on our agenda this evening is the approval of the consent agenda. I will now entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second.
It has been moved by Director Stewart and seconded by Director Guthrie. Superintendent Holman, will you please poll the board?
Yes, I will. Director Yoakum?
Yes.
Director Stewart?
Yes.
Director La Liberty?
Yes.
Vice President Guthrie?
Yes.
And President Choi?
Yes, motion carries. Dr. Holman, will you please review the donations this evening?
I will. Tonight in the board's packet, there's an astonishing donation amount of over $138,000 going to our schools to support students. Al-Qaeda Elementary PTSA, Clara Barton Elementary PTSA, Krista McAuliffe PTSA, Mark Twain PTSA, the Eastlake High School Booster Club for both boys basketball, girls basketball, and the Juanita High School Girls Performing Arts Booster Club, all donating resources to enhance the experience of our students. And so just want to offer a heartfelt thank you to each of those groups, those that donated to those organizations for the betterment of our students.
Yes, thank you. The next item we have on our agenda is legislative business. I believe we're going to start with our staff update. Dr. Holman.
Yes, and so Associate Superintendent Posthumus has a short but meaningful update this evening.
Thank you very much. It's always short and always meaningful. So we're approaching the first legislative milestone of the session. The committee cutoff is next Friday, February 21st. That's the point at which all bills must pass policy committees in order to continue advancing in the ledge session. This week, we have planned written or verbal testimony on 10 bills covering the big three, which includes special education, MSOC, curriculum bills, student mental health support, and are monitoring several others. As you're already aware, Senator Dingra's LGL bill, Senate Bill 5095, was approved by the Senate Early Learning and K-12 Education Committee last Tuesday and was referred to the Senate Ways and Means Committee. We're waiting to see if the Ways and Means Committee will hold a hearing or if it will be relieved of further consideration, which allows them to refer directly to rules for floor consideration. We expect the latter since there's no fiscal impact. Last week, Representative Callan introduced House Bill 1796, the companion bill to the Senate's LGO bill. The bill will have a hearing this Thursday in the House Capital Budget Committee, and Dr. Holman will provide testimony at this hearing.
Thank you very much. Director Yoakum, did you have a legislative update?
Yes, mine is long and meaningful. So I attended the National School Board Association's Advocacy and Equity Institute in Washington, D.C. from February 1st through the 5th, along with approximately 20 to 25 Washington State School Board directors and WASDA staff. The first 2 days were dedicated to learning and networking. And I will provide a more detailed write-up, but I just want to highlight some of the key takeaways from the federal update that we received. So as we've all seen, the new administration has issued some bold statements and executive orders regarding federal funding. We were informed that legal challenges are likely ahead. I feel like I've learned a lot around education at the federal level. So correct me if I'm wrong on any of this. What I took away was the Budget Act of 1974 limits executive branch's ability to alter spending approved by Congress. However, the current administration considers that act unconstitutional. And if the Supreme Court rules in favor of the executive branch's ability to interfere with congressionally appropriated funds, the consequences for public schools can be significant. So at this point, kind of what we were told is much remains uncertain, and the court's ruling will be crucial. We also learned that the Office of Civil Rights has begun investigating schools, and these investigations appear to be means of kind of pressuring districts to comply with recent administrative changes. The federal update concluded with an important reminder. While much of what we hear is political messaging, we must take everything seriously and stay informed of everything that's happening. If current administration potentially oversteps, the most effective response is collective advocacy, and our voices matter. We must engage with federal policymakers in large numbers. So this was kind of our update that we received in the messaging that was provided to NSBA members. Some highlights. I do want to just really quickly switch to positive pieces from the conference. I had an opportunity actually at one of the breakouts to share about our OE3, which is our community engagement. There was a breakout session around engagement with family and community members, and I was incredibly proud to share part of the policy and received interest from actually board directors nationwide who wanted to learn more. So that was really nice. That felt good. Another highlight was an unexpected visit from Senator Bernie Sanders. We also heard from actress and advocate Holly Robinson Peete, who I remember from hanging with Mr. Cooper. She spoke about her advocacy work as a parent navigating the public school system with her autistic son. And her closing words really resonated deeply with me. She said, "I would never change my son to fit into this world, but I would change the world to better fit my son." I was probably the only one at the table crying over that, but that's easy to do. So the final 2 days of my trip were really spent advocating on Capitol Hill, and I gained valuable insight into federal education funding. I was fortunate to attend these meetings alongside dedicated WASDA advocates. I mean, really, a lot of our school board directors and staff there really impressed me. We met with 7 Department of Education staff members responsible for Title I, Impact Aid, and IDEA. When we asked the Deputy Assistant Secretary, who is an appointee from the new administration, we asked her, what should we tell families, staff, and students about the possibility of the Department of Education shutting down? We received this response, and I'm putting it in quotes. The president was elected by our country to restore the purpose of learning back to our schools and rid of all ideology. His goal is to reform the department and empower states and local school boards to serve students. And this was messaging that we heard throughout conversations that we had on the Hill. Our WASDA delegation also met with the FCC to discuss a Supreme Court case concerning E-rate and with the acting administrator of the USDA Food and Nutrition Services. In preparation for our meetings with our state representatives and senators, the WASDA delegation spent weeks refining our key talking points. And before the day on the Hill, we actually met in this room for a few hours and reviewed and fine-tuned and ensured that really what we were focused on was what lawmakers needed from us. We knew that kind of going in, and we didn't want to sound tone deaf of, hey, this is really what we need funded, when we kind of know chaos that's happening there right now. So it was a focus on really, what is it that we can do for you? So Washington State School Board directors met with 9 of our 10 representatives, and I personally met with Representative Del Bene and staff from the offices of Representative Schreier and Representative Jayapal. A smaller group from WASDA's Federal Relations Network also met with Senator Cantwell and staff from Senator Murray's office. And so as a member of FRN, the Federal Relations Network, I participated in those discussions, which was nice. While we presented our key issues, we also really prioritized listening. Every official and every staff member we met with really emphasized the same need: stories. They want to hear firsthand how federal programs impact students, families, and staff, and what would happen if funding were cut. While data is useful, they said that personal narratives really carry the most weight. So now I am brainstorming ways to mobilize our community to share these stories with federal representatives. that is a summary. I will provide more detailed notes from the conference.
Thank you very much, Director Yoakum. Yeah, it's somewhat disheartening to hear your update. I look forward to reading the summary. Thank you for journeying all the way to DC on our behalf. And I know it's not an easy trip to make, and yeah, I appreciate it. The next item on our agenda this evening is monitoring of results 2, academic content, knowledge, and skills. One of our 3 results policies. Following the presentation, the board will have an opportunity for questions and comments. Dr. Holman, will you please present a summary of the monitoring report?
Absolutely. And so I appreciate the time that the board has spent really digging into the results 2 monitoring report already. We had a study session tonight focused on one of the portions of results 2, and that's early literacy. We know that as we think about student success all the way through graduation and beyond, that early literacy truly is foundational in that. And so appreciate all of the work from Director Kelly Pease, Dr. Jen Rose in preparing that report for the board in the study session tonight. I also said in the study session that our work related to academic outcomes goes hand in hand with our commitment to equity and ensuring that students have what they need to be successful in our system. At times that means there's students that may need more than others. They may need additional supports. They may need additional services, whatever those are, because our commitment is that each student in our system accomplishes and achieves success and excellence throughout their career here in Lake Washington. And so tonight, results 2 is presented to you as reasonable progress with noted exceptions. And noted exceptions is a nice way of saying we continue to have gaps within our data where we have student groups that have historically underperformed differently than their peers. And for us, while it's a noted exception, we can't be okay with that. And that is, as we present this tonight, we will share successes, but it's always with the knowledge that we continue to do work because we know that there are students that are not having the same level of success as their peers. And so while noted exceptions sounds really nice, it means there's students not having success in our system right now. And so all of the work we do, all of the OEs that we present, all of the operational work that we do, the curriculum work, the work related to social emotional well-being of our students, professional learning for our set, like all of it is in service of, at some point in time, to be able to present results 2 as reasonable progress. And so tonight, Dr. Rose has, while our LEDGE report was short and beneficial, this is the not short and beneficial presentation. No, Dr. Rose will provide the board with an overview, knowing that you and the public have access to the full results 2 monitoring report. And we're excited to have this conversation with the board tonight. Dr. Rose?
Thank you. So I think, Director Yoakum, as you were speaking, I was thinking about results 2 is this large report. We've talked about the number of pages with an enormous amount of data in it. And each data point represents a person, or it represents a group of people, and it represents stories. So I think about in preparing this report, and this was actually some of the guidance that the board gave last week, is thinking about that balance of looking at data and recognizing how important it is to be able to measure our progress against ourselves and benchmarking around other districts, being able to see where our successes are, and also really being able to continue to think about what are the stories of the students that are behind each of the data points that we look at. So results 2 is our academic content, knowledge, and skills. And the superintendent's interpretation is every student will demonstrate an academic achievement to their fullest potential and be equipped with the ability to successfully apply their learning in multiple settings. I think that's such an important statement, especially as we think about the K-3 literacy presentation that we just looked at, with thinking about learning is really important, and it's important in how we can apply it. That our skills, as we think about how they transfer across different content areas, or that we look at different assessments, are really important to think about how they go across multiple settings so that our students become really empowered citizens in a democracy. So the components of results 2 are 2.1, students will develop reading, writing, speaking, listening, and language skills in alignment with Common Core. 2.2, they will become increasingly proficient in math. And 2.3, students will become increasingly proficient in science. And we quantify those more specifically with multiple assessments. So we're looking again at thinking about the level of ability that students would have for proficiency in literacy and language. Same thing in math. And we're looking at the assessments that we have, and we'll look at them specifically in a moment. We're looking beyond our system to ways that we can compare to how we're doing nationally, how we're doing at the state level. And part of that is locating our own progress and being able to look within our achievements to think, how are we measuring up with other parts of the state and the system. To echo what Dr. Holman said, when we talk about any of the R's, any of the OEs that we're looking at, that our commitment to equity is first and foremost. That when we're thinking about equitable outcomes, when we're thinking about how equity shows up with our students, it really shows up in the options and the opportunities that they have in life and the achievements that they have. And so equity really can mean many different things, but specifically it means instruction that allows all students to reach their potential and be at grade level. Equity means a mindset that our leaders have in supporting instructional shifts with our teachers. Equity shows up in the classroom and how our students experience the learning and how they achieve the learning. One of the things I'd ask the board to keep in mind as I go through R2 is most of R2 is satellite data, and that's really important to see how we're operating as a whole system. I've heard Lake Washington multiple times described as like a huge steamship going through, and that's our satellite data. That's that broad path that we have. Our map data gets down to be more specific, and the board has seen and heard lots of different ways that map data shows up, where we're looking at FastBridge, we're looking at more targeted grade level information. What's really powerful in thinking about how these all align and have impact is thinking about the street data. So as I'm talking about math, as I'm talking about 3rd grade or 5th grade math, the board was in a multiple second grade math classrooms 2 months ago, I think, and that data that you have, those experiences are really important to think about how those different pieces line up with really important satellite data going down to the kinds of interactions that you saw with students in street data. That's really important for us as we think about, an earlier question came up in the study session about how do we measure success? And we measure success at all of those different levels, and they all have validity, even though some are more hard to measure than others. So I just wanted to bring that into mind as we're moving into R2. The specific indicators, most of the indicators are either coming from Smarter Balanced assessments or FastBridge with our beginning of year, middle of year, end of year. They are coming from the Washington, the WCAS, our state assessment on science, or they're coming from our report cards. So these are, again, satellite data, but they're pieces that we're able to compare year over year so we can see what growth we're making with as a whole system and with specific groups of students. One of the things that's really important to think about with these pieces is that it is really important for us to have standardized data where we understand and can compare ourselves in many different ways. And these tests are somewhat proxies for what do we really want for our students. So when we look at our student profile, this is the holistic picture of what we want for our student practices and our student skill sets that go to the mindsets of being empowered citizens, of being students that have capacity, self-efficacy, that they have the ability for critical thinking, communication, collaboration, creativity, all those pieces. But when we're thinking about the R's, all of these pieces have these embedded in them. And part of the craft and the art of teaching and of learning is to bring these through and to really think about those. So as you're thinking about the levels of data from satellite to map to street, the street data is probably where you're going to see more of these pieces show up. But that's our goal in thinking about how these measurements show up with our student profile. So as we're thinking about R2, really it serves multiple purposes. So one is thinking about overhead lighting. It brings light to the whole system. What's the larger picture of what we're seeing? And it also highlights some specific areas where we have some opportunity and deep obligation to think about our practice. And it highlights some places that things are going really well. So it serves multiple purposes in how it informs our work going forward. So our theory of action with R2 is that if we systematically analyze student performance data, implement evidence-based instructional practices, utilize high-quality instructional resources, provide meaningful professional learning for teachers, plan for differentiated support for students, ensure alignment with learning standards, and foster a culture of high expectations and continuous improvement, then we will achieve substantial and sustainable growth in overall academic performance across all grade levels and subject areas, resulting in enhanced student achievement, increased graduation rates, and improved college and career readiness for students. I would say that this theory of action, you've seen some piece of it show up in board briefs pretty much every week. That as we think about the work that we're doing and work to keep the board informed, many of the board briefs that we write are directly aligned with that. And I'll tell you that every time we look at board briefs to share with the board from the instructional side of the house, honestly, I just look at my calendar, or I look at calendars of the different people and see what is the work that we're working on, and be able to share our daily work with you is leading to this system, to this theory of action. One thing Director Pease talked about in thinking about R2 is the OSPI Learning Standards Review, and I know you've heard about this several times. What OSPI has released about this is part what Director Pease was saying about wanting to have the standards be integrated so the learning could transfer, they could be more applicable, and because there's a recognition that the standards that are now being assessed or being stated by, that are now part of OSPI that are being assessed by Smarter Balanced are a tremendous list. And being able to, it's not that they're not valid, but there's so much that it's hard to focus on what's really important. So the goal of OSPI is to narrow down to what is important and to make it be something that can be learned and taught in application. The other piece before we get into looking at data to know is that recently, meaning November of 2024, OSPI clarified language about achievement in a way that we haven't ever used in Washington State. That we've typically in Washington State have said level 1 and level 2 are not at grade level standard, level 3 and level 4 are. And OSPI clarified, and I don't know if it was going back to the language with Smarter Balanced, but they clarified that level 1 is not consistently demonstrating grade level standard, but level 2 is. And they called it foundational grade level knowledge. So it's not at standard, they're calling it foundational, which is a question for a later date to consider. How does that impact our monitoring, or how do we think about being at standard? When we look at, actually I'll get to that in a moment, but it's interesting to think about that shift of students at level 2 are demonstrating foundational grade level knowledge, and level 3 and level 4, I think the language that they use, let me get it exactly right, is their students for level 3 and level 4 are on track for college level learning without needing remedial classes. And level 2 is foundational grade level knowledge. So we'll look at that comparison in a minute, but I just wanted to call through that that's language that's very, very different from the past. The other piece I wanted to call through is as we're looking at how we compare ourselves to the state and how we compare ourselves regionally, that OSPI relatively recently put out a memo comparing Washington State schools nationally, and nationally with the work that they were looking at with the NAEP, the Washington State overall compares very favorably nationally. So then when we look at how we compare to the state or how we compare regionally, that was just something I wanted to bring in because, as Dr. Holman said, there are many places that we look at in our system where we see need for deep work, and when we put it in a scale of where are we overall, there's some really positive things. One thing about R2 is that when we look at the numbers, we really set high targets for ourselves. So when we say we want all students to learn, we are serious about that with our targets in R2. We have comparative strength to the state and to other districts. We still, and you'll see this in cohort data, we still in most of the cohort data are seeing a trend down over the 4-year trend or over the 3-year trend of cohort that parallels the state. In the text in R2, Tim Krieger, who did a phenomenal amount of work with his team to put all this data together. But he captured specifically, and I don't have it in my mind for specific content areas, that the state dropped in all areas for Smarter Balanced in content areas post-COVID. We also did, but at about maybe 50% of the rate that the state did. We started from a higher level, we didn't fall as far, and we're recovering in a pretty strong way. So what this looks at, if you look at on the left, so the ELA math and science on the left, where it's at the top, it says 50.3. That's what, if we looked at performance levels 3 and 4, so typical, the historical language of being at standard, that's how the state, how Lake Washington compares to the state. So in ELA, 78.4% pass to 50% at the state, 72 to 39.4. If you add in level 2, then Lake Washington goes up again, but not as much as the state. The state goes up more significantly. So we go up, what is that, 11% in ELA, and the state goes up 20%. So much of R2 we have to make hypotheses about things, but one of the things that we're discussing in cabinet today was we actually have students, we have more students performing at levels 3 and 4 than at 2. So we've got like a bulk of our students are already performing at high levels. And so while the state, when they add in 2 to be at standard, makes a significant jump, we don't make as big of a jump. Our students are already there. So, piece of data, this is actually from 2023. This wasn't from the New York Times, and they didn't recreate a similar national chart for this year, but in looking at where Lake Washington compares to math scores across the state of Washington, we are significantly ahead of the US average, and we're significantly ahead of most of the state. So that's in math, and there was another recent article that was in, let's see, it was an article that was shared by Director Guthrie, which was really helpful to look at. But this is looking at the predictability of where a district, let's see if I can explain this. The line that goes down is the predictability line for with a district population where reading achievement at 3rd grade might be predicted to be. Lake Washington is that dot third from the top at the curve up there. So the predictability of where our students would be down at the red line based on demographics of our district. The actuality, and I should have put this in Director Pease's presentation because it's pretty significant to look at our students, our teachers, our district outperforms the predictability by a significant amount. So in benchmarking to other districts, and those are the charts are at the end of R2, we have very consistent performance. So in 4 out of 9 categories, we are first or second in 4 out of the 9. And I shared earlier in the study session that if we're second, it's because Mercer Island is ahead of us. So, and that's actually true even when we're third. There are districts with very different sizes than us, and factors that they're working with. So the benchmarking and comparing ourselves to regional districts really shows that we're holding steady in most places, or increasing in some significant ways. The slight decline, this is really interesting to me, that we dropped in 3 categories by, in math we dropped from 2nd to 3rd, and in math at 5th grade we dropped from 3rd to 4th. Those are 1.6 or 1.1% drops in our SBA scores. In science at 5th grade, we dropped from 1st to 5th, and that was a 1.1% change in our SBA scores. So much of R2 is interesting because you look at it and go, that's interesting. I'm not sure what's causal about that, or how much to read into 1.1%. So when we look at the work that we're doing this year, based on response to the work that we did last year and to the needs of our students, our systemic focus on change has really, again, been looking at how are we shifting to become more consistent in our core instruction and our Tier 1 instruction, and how do we do that as an entire system? So things that we've done this year is really deepen the implementation of the instructional playbook. And to some extent, that's almost a stand-in for universal design for learning, that many of the strategies, all of the strategies in the instructional playbook are aligned with providing students access, ways to express themselves, ways to engage in high levels of rigorous thinking. So we intentionally deepen implementation of the instructional playbook, and we continue to focus on universal design for learning and providing access and growth for all students. A significant piece of work this year was the implementation of the student growth goals. Key elements of that, like we shared in the study session and have come up before, are cognitive and emotional engagement. Parts of the student growth goals that are deeply around assessment and they're really at that street level data is that what is required in the student growth goals is that students assess their own experience of the learning and they assess their own learning. So that's a really powerful way to think about, like, how are students feeling not done to, but they learn with. They are empowered to be learners. So that work with student growth goals has really been around transforming that practice and working with our teachers. That student growth goals in the past used to be you could start any time in the fall and finish sometime in June, and that student growth could happen anytime, or maybe even it happened over the entire year. A major shift in student growth goals is that teachers look at growth within a unit. So it's much quicker, it's much more focused, it's much more looking at what are the instructional shifts that happen to increase student learning. That, I don't know when that will show up in R2, but that shift to how are we being really intentional and thoughtful and visible in what we want students to learn, and then being able to react pretty quickly to they learned it and they didn't, so what do we do now? And the teachers are encouraged to, when they're doing student growth goals, it's actually not supposed to be something new and different and separate and shiny. It's supposed to be their regular practice, that they're able to capture student growth as part of their basic practice. So that's a really exciting shift that we will build on implementing the new Danielson framework for next year. The principal professional learning communities have been fantastic. They're very focused on instructional improvement. I've been lucky enough to be on many of them, and the level of conversation and the focus on student learning is outstanding. And the commitment that leaders have to deeply engage with each other, and as part of it, like every learning walk ends in what is each leader going to do in the next bit of time, and then when they meet again 6 weeks later or however much later, they engage in what happened with that learning that you did and that focus that you had in your professional learning community. So that's something that's really powerful that has taken off even more this year than last year. We've talked quite a bit about our MTSS coaches deepening their expertise to provide job-embedded professional learning. Some of that learning has included there are cadres of MTSS coaches that have deepened expertise in different areas. So there's a group that's really focused in on K-5 math, and they're providing additional resources and thought for all of the coaches as they're supporting teachers. Same thing in literacy, same thing with the learning around depth and complexity and supporting highly capable students. So our systemic focus continues to be on that professional learning and engaging with teacher leaders and department chairs. Teacher leaders were part of the implementation of student growth goals, and they were trained right alongside our principals, received that professional learning with the expectation that they go back and they become a resource for the teachers in the building around growth. Department chairs at the high school level have been working this year to align their departments as well in terms of thinking about resources that are needed, student learning, all those pieces. So as a system, we continue to think, how are we really keeping a clear focus on instruction and supporting that with expectations and resources? So this is thinking about what are the different levers that we pull on for instructional practice. So specialists collaborating with resources, teachers with professional learning communities. You heard some in the study session about the instructional shifts for multilingual and safety net teachers. One thing I'll call out with any of these is that they're not single year things. So you'll see some repeats or some deepening from last year because none of this should be one-off. We should always be thinking about the professional learning for instructional shifts and being specific about who is in the initial part of it, who's in the implementing, who's in the sustaining part of any professional learning that we're doing. That multiple department collaboration, you've heard about that in a whole bunch of different ways, most recently thinking about the reading task force. So these are things that are not one-offs. They are things that we continue to deepen and use our own assessments to guide instruction and guide our reactions to it. Same thing at the school level. So what we do at the district level shows up at the school level. Schools are setting academic goals. They're identifying and implementing strategies for groups of students. We're continuing to work with data and provide instructional response cycles. PLCs are still absolutely key to learning and change at the school level system. One thing that we're adding to, there's always been on-demand learning for our teachers through Cornerstone. What we've added this year is just-in-time district-provided professional learning opportunities on at least a monthly basis where teachers are provided a menu and they can engage in learning based on information from our program survey from last year, information from actual building leadership teams filled out a survey in the fall that has guided that it continues to guide the development of the menu of professional learning that teachers engage in. And we've kept it very focused on what are our goals for our system? How are we supporting teacher professional learning? So that's the background and the set to think about what are all the things that go into thinking about, now that we look at data, what are the stories, what are the intentional systemic shifts behind the data that you see. And I started with math, not with literacy, for two reasons. One, you just went to a study session on literacy, but two, in math, we start to really see the impact of systemic focus. And I wanted to walk us through some of that. And again, to say R2 is difficult to say this thing equals that thing, but there's patterns in math that I think speak to the systemic work that we've been doing for several years. So some of that work has been, we adopted illustrative mathematics in 2021. And the history prior to that was we used Envision Math and had some challenges, I will say. It was a very traditional math curriculum. And we had challenges with that because it was not responsive to our students and honestly didn't ask enough of our students. And it was one of the challenges in instructional resources is as the world has shifted from textbooks to more responsive resources, we actually had like Envision twice essentially turned off their platform on us and said, you're out of contract because the contract expired and we just don't support that platform anymore, so good luck. So we were really excited when we adopted illustrative because it was a very, very different type of curriculum and a set of instructional resources that came with strategies. More than like, here's the handouts or here's all the different pieces, it came with strategies. So when we adopted it in 2021, it was accompanied by intensive professional learning. So intensive professional learning for teachers, with multiple cohorts of teachers. So all teachers engaged in learning, and we had book studies, we had multiple different book studies, we had learning cohorts, we offered a lot of opt-in to create the efficacy, the collective, I'm trying to think of the name of it, but could create enough force in the system that when we got to real implementation, there was enough expertise that people could adopt with more integrity to the curriculum. So we also looked at rubrics for implementation of practices and of resources. And it really wasn't are teachers teaching it or are they not? It was thinking about how do the practices show up in the classroom with another level of what shifts, what moves does the leader of a building make to get to that fidelity of implementation and integrity of implementation, to what resources need to come from the central office to support this being something that is exciting and satisfying and fulfilling. We provided book studies for building leaders. We engaged in all kinds of professional learning. It's been the instructional focus of many principal PLCs. And the significant opt-in learning at district and building level, some examples of that are, I actually think it would have been summer of 2022. We had 300 teachers opt into a course taught from Stanford by Joe Bowler. And we didn't pay them. We could not pay them for I think it was like a 60-hour course, but we offered clock hours and we said, we'll pay your registration fee, which was like $95. But to have that many teachers opt into learning was really powerful. You've seen the impacts of other professional learning with the building thinking classrooms, with the vertical surfaces. That is on fire. Every time there's a book study about that for the past several years, it is filled up, so we just keep rolling with it. On next, I would invite you, but you have school visits next Friday. But building thinking classrooms will be in this boardroom with a cohort of our teachers and our leaders learning together because it just is something that's been really exciting. And so we've had district sponsored with that, but you saw the impacts of the book study at Blackwell. That was the building there decided to do their own book study, had 17 teachers opt in, and you saw the impact on practice. So, and we keep on thinking about how are these all tying to inclusive practices, like building thinking classrooms. That vertical surface is does not have to be in just math, but that's where the application is. So what we see when we look at percentage of grade 5 students meeting state standards on math, we see significant growth in the annual trend. We see like there's room to grow when we look at to have our black students have an annual trend of plus 7.1, which is one of the highest you'll see anywhere in R2, and we're still at 40.4 meeting standard. So that's something where we look at it and we see a lot to celebrate, but we see consistently across populations, across student groups, we see significant growth. When we look at, but it's interesting, so if you look at this and you see significant growth and we see relatively strong benchmarking, when we look at the cohort, our 3rd, 4th, 5th graders, we actually see like these are students that are there's still a trend line down. That's what we see at the state level as well as that trend line down. And we have hypotheses about this. So these were students that would have been in 2nd grade when COVID hit and and even the K-1-2 math that they would have had, if you'll recall my remarks about Envision. So it's hard to say what's causal. What's exciting is that there's a positive annual trend for all student groups, and we have lots of work to do. Again, we see in our report card data, and this is like Kelly talked about, many factors go into the report card data. We are continuing to see mostly a positive trend there. Okay, so there's more data around 5th grade math that I could refer to the report, but wanted to just pause there and see if there's any questions before I shift to talking about secondary math.
Director Yoakum.
Okay, so just a question. I mean, I did have a few statistics classes in business school, but I am curious when you go back and look at the annual trend for grade 5 math and just looking at students receiving special education, is this trend data of 4.4, positive 4.4, meaningful when 2024 is a significant outlier?
I think that's a great question. And I think we'll have to see. The last year's data for 5th grade math, to me, it looks similar to what we see in literacy, where there were bright spots and it kind of looked like we were holding steady. And it's a little hard to tell grade over grade, so this is kind of where maybe it's the overhead lighting, but this is different than what we see in most other areas for that kind of trend. So most other areas, like if we see consistent growth, it's maybe plus 1%, or it's like plus 1, minus 1, kind of varies a little bit. So this is one that it's exciting, and we're going to have to continue to think, what does it actually mean? Especially because, we're benchmarking at 3 and 4, so other districts are holding steady as well. So this is one that we'll continue to look at this to see if it's consistent. That's my theory.
I was wondering if you could speak to, in general, I would say, when we look at assessment kind of data versus classroom grade data, we tend to see similar trajectories. So if it's a positive trend on one, then it's kind of a positive trend on the other. And usually the numbers are somewhat close. In particular for grade 5 math, with our Black African American students, we're seeing a great positive trend of a plus 7.1. But then when we look at the grade 5 math average of a 3 or above, we see a negative 3.8. And I was curious what you're deducing from that.
Right. So I can, again, not causal, I have some suppositions for things. One thing I would note is that the N size is 49 across 29 schools. And those are individual stories and people there. So actually, I don't have a theory for why our Black African American students are going down at that level, why that's contrasted that way. I think actually that it's something when we say our focus needs to be on equity, I think that's a sign that it really does need to be, because you'll actually see that trend in report card data across many of the report card pieces of R2, where our Black students have a negative annual trend when most other groups have a positive trend. And so I think that speaks to thinking about how we are supporting all students and our mindsets for growth for all students. So when we think about equitable outcomes, I think this is very much a task light of our report card grades for our Black students need more unpacking.
Tonight in this study session, Ella asked a great question about the relationship between how students are feeling about themselves in the classroom and the academic learning that occurs. We were talking about literacy, but I think it's here as well. I commented on there's other factors that play into students seeing themselves in the classroom as learners, and it's all of those factors we talked about that also play into students and teachers and staff and community and schools viewing all students as capable learners in our classrooms. And we know that there's implicit bias that goes into the development of large-scale assessment, formative assessment, grading. Like, as we think about the ongoing work, our work and our commitment to equity is also about how do we continue to understand how implicit bias plays into our work with students as well, related to having high expectations for every student, understanding how that affects potentially grading and things like that. So I don't remember who asked the question, but I think it's a good question. And that's why we continue to focus on issues related to equity, because it's that important. And we know that it shows up in certain places, and so, and none of us are immune from that. And so that's why all of us have personal work that we need to do related to this. And so that's, to me, as I look at this, that's probably what jumps out at me. And that's not to indict any one person. Like, that is the system that that we live within, and our responsibility as educators is to continue to do our personal work, work with our teams, work with our schools, work with our system.
Okay, so secondary math. One of the really cool things that has happened is the alignment of elementary and secondary math. So all of that work that's been happening with IM in elementary is, I think, starting to really pay off in secondary. So since we actually started working on math pathways, really it was before 2019 that the active work started happening in 2019, and has been like really, we are in the, like, it's exciting. I'd say we're in the thick of it, but we are just excited to be moving forward with this. What has happened with that is the alignment and development of a rigorous scope and sequence where we're still calling it 6+ math and 7+ math. That'll go away pretty soon, and we'll just call it 6th grade math and 7th grade math because that's the expectation. But we're just having some designation as we're moving through the system of things are different in these courses. But that will change in the course catalog soon when that's just what we do is 6th grade math that leads into algebra at 8th grade. So 6+ curriculum scope and sequence has been adjusted, same with 7+. There's been intensive work done with algebra to make it be, there used to be some conception that there was middle school algebra and high school algebra. It's really algebra taught in a way that all students can access it, and it is algebra. So that instructional resource work has happened. We've brought in cohorts of Algebra 1 teachers to do that work and then to engage in professional learning on what the instructional pedagogy would look like with that. There's been interaction and engagement with buildings, with working with departments. There's been professional learning collaboration across the district where there's been opportunities for teachers to come together and work together and learn together. PLCs and teacher collaboration. And lots of creativity and commitment to making this work has been pretty outstanding. I was sharing, I think, several of you have heard me talk about visiting Englewood a couple of weeks ago, and the level of teacher collaboration and expectation for student success was pretty profound. Where one of the teachers tonight, Jennifer Hahn, who received her national board, had some practices that she shared with her department that they all adopted because they were so powerful with kids. She didn't tell me that. Another teacher was talking about how great it was and that they were adopting shared practices. Another teacher at the school, Seth Arbro, was talking about how, and they actually don't have 8th grade math this year. They have only algebra. They jumped into the pathway early. And they were talking before the semester about the principal, Dan Irvine, was asking them if they had students that were failing that might need some potential support, or what would they do in terms of registration for second semester. And one of the terrific teachers there, Seth Arbro, told Dan, give us a little bit, because the students that right now look like they might be failing, they're missing some pieces of learning, and we think we can find ways to get them those pieces of learning genuinely, so they're going to be at the mid-year grade level algebra, they're going to be at there by the semester, and we can have them transition into second semester, having passed first semester, and be like really engaged in algebra learning. So I haven't checked back to see how that played out, but that level of commitment and creativity and focus on what do our students need right now and how do we get it to them, I just want to recognize is some powerful teacher practice right there. And I think we see it play out. I mean, we are far from the goal that we have set for ourselves, and we are seeing some significant growth again with our students. And this is one of the places that, in terms of benchmarking, we went to first, which is something I think to be pretty significantly proud of with our students. So this has been work that our middle school teachers, our middle school building leaders, and our math specialist, Wendy Robarts, have really taken on. How do we set really high expectations for our students and have it be something that they're excited about? And some of the students, I have my notes in my notepad, but I was asking them, my standard questions when I go into math classrooms right now are asking students if 5, like, you're so excited to be here, math has always been your favorite subject, and I've just asked them about the content area, or 1, you're like, anywhere but here. I ask students to rate how they feel about math. And the students in these classes, like actually at Englewood, they were like saying 4s, and my follow-up question for them was, have you always felt that way? And the students pretty much said, no, I've been a 1, I've been a 2 most of my life. In terms of how I feel about math, I've never been good at math, is what they're saying. And I asked them, so what makes the difference? What makes math instruction be something that works for you? And they said, it actually goes to your point, Ella. They said, I feel like I belong. I feel like I'm good at math, so I like being here. The teacher explains things in a way that makes sense to me. They have patience, and I can ask questions. I can work with my peers so that we can work together and get to the right answer, and we can talk about it like it's expected that we talk about it. And the way the work is set up, we engage with each other. So just thinking about like that is such a profound mindset for our teachers to have. And I'll say it's like a while ago, like years and years ago, that I don't know that was common. And so I would say for our students now, our teachers now to be working with students is pretty exciting. And this is a cohort that I think the cohort data, we're really looking like we're holding steady, which for thinking about cohort data and how it compares to the state is pretty significant. The state is still down pretty significantly in looking at pre-COVID data. But one of the things and I'll come back to this slide, but one of the things that's exciting is trepidation that I've heard from different people about moving to all students accessing algebra by 8th grade is, what will the impact be on grades? And this slide's a little bit, needs some unpacking. This slide is, so the N of 1,559 is about 150 students more than the N was last year. So we're increasing the number of students that are in algebra already. The N is 8th grade students who took algebra either 8th grade, 7th grade, or 8th grade. So it's not 1,559 kids taking algebra in 8th grade. They might be in geometry. But it's the grade that they got in algebra. So that's exciting to see that as we're adding more students, even though there's a slight negative annual trend in the grade, we're still in our target area. And we have an expectation. This is a snapshot of all 8th grade students. So this is really our N of 2,300. And their grades last year with a C or higher in their 8th grade math class. So as these students are transitioning into algebra, there probably is going to be some impact on grades, like that all of that green might change a little bit. And we're still pretty excited about that we're seeing with this trend that there's a trend for grades to go up. But we're pretty excited to see that we're asking more of our students and they're responding by doing well. And we know that there are students that are going to need additional support as all students move into algebra. Okay, so and then in 10th grade, I think we're seeing some of the impacts of the work that we've done, but I think the work in restructuring algebra has been pretty powerful. We've been working a lot on math pathways to think about, as our students are moving up with that change, how are we supporting them with the courses they can take. And I'll say our secondary math teachers, middle school and high school, have been deeply engaged in collaboration with each other over the past several years. So I think we see that as a positive growth trend as well. This is our math cohort, math 6 through 10. We are again seeing that trend slight in most places. That parallels the state and is not as steep as the state. So math is interesting because we see in our annual trends, we continue to see growth, and we also continue to see we're still working to meet our goals. So I'm thinking about math, and I say this especially thinking about where we are in literacy in my comments earlier, that we're right on the verge with many things in literacy. Math has had things percolating for quite some time. So the story reaches back to 2019 or more. There's been an alignment of resources. So illustrative mathematics, the revised scope and sequence with middle school math, the collaboration and learning across levels, and I'd shared the story, I think, earlier, that there's been school-to-school that has been arranged by the school-to-school visits that have been arranged by the school. So Juanita elementary teachers went to Finn Hill to watch math classes. They saw math practices happening there and went back, and the practices that they saw, they started up in their classroom. And they were talking about modeling that at a staff meeting and maybe actually using that strategy at a staff meeting to have those practices go along. So that excitement about change and the success that teachers are seeing in their students. So there's nothing that changes people more than seeing success. So that's kind of one of the things that the pathway does, is instead of wondering if our students will be successful, we've flipped it to say we expect our students to be successful and we'll support them in those high levels of rigor. And that's really creating a mindset with teachers of students can absolutely do this. And our building leaders have been phenomenal through this, just really engaging with each other. And many of our building leaders have actually led sessions on math during our district leadership, our week, or during our strategic leadership meetings where we have our leaders come together. And we're continuing to think about how do we adjust this? How are we using student growth? How are we thinking about assessment? What are the tools that we're bringing in? What are the ways that we're really supporting our students as we increase expectations of rigorous learning? So that is the math story. I'll pause and see if there's questions or thoughts.
Director Guthrie.
Just one quick one, making sure that I'm understanding the data right. So we're looking at, for grade 8, we're looking at the current 9th graders, the students who are currently in 9th grade. So this is our last cohort to go through that has not had any access to the Math Plus, the 6 Plus and 7 Plus pathways.
They have had, this class will have had some access, and I'm trying to remember the specific dates in there, but I think it was 2021 that we started piloting some of the resources, and then we had we had schools opt in. So starting from like 2021, 22, Evergreen, Redmond Middle, ICS, trying to remember where else. Multiple schools opted in and kind of had some flexibility about how they did that.
Okay, got it. So and it's a mixed bag. It's not, and certainly not everybody was there. And as we're looking in future R2s, we'll be seeing more and more students have access to that. Although, a lot of what you're talking about is sort of a mindset shift, which if teachers are, even if the course hasn't changed or the scope and sequence, but if they're, sort of starting to think differently about their 6th graders, that's probably going to benefit their 7th graders as well, which is cool to see. Another question I had, which you may not know off the top of your head, but looking at some of the ends, the number of students who are participating in SBA is always higher than the number of students receiving a grade. Not looking at the percentages, just literally looking at that end, kind of the denominator. And I know that there's some business rules that exclude, for example, I think I was understanding like transfer credits don't count. So if I show up in February, I take SBAs, but I don't have a first semester grade because I was in Utah or something, I don't know. I'm not counted in that N. And then there were some grades that are excluded too, like P's and S's. So it got a little complicated. And what I noticed was that that there's differences in the drop-offs for different student groups. So like you've got grade 8 grades up here. Asian students, for example, there were 908. For SBA, it was 910. So it was a very small drop-off. Students receiving special education services, I think, was over 200 who took SBA, and then 40 plus of them dropped off here, which is like 20% of the students. It's a really significant number. So there's not really a question here, more of a comment, but like understanding, when we look at the percentages, we're looking at the students who, what percentage of students kind of cross the finish line. I don't love that analogy, but who see the success that we want to see. Versus who get lost along the way. But it seems like too we may have some students who are not even making it to the starting line. They're not even part of this denominator, and just unpacking what are the factors that would lead to that, and whether there's some system work to do there. Thinking about our students receiving special education services, for example, and the study session that we had a few weeks ago. Around secondary inclusion for students on IEPs, and sort of what math class are they taking? Is that counted in here? Unpacking some of that might be helpful. So sorry, that was not really a question, more of exposition, and I will stop talking now. Thank you.
No, I think that's a great point, and I think we could come back to you or put in a brief more of what that data is. And I'd meant to pull up the specific numbers, but we had just had Tim Krieger pulled up for us actually in one of the meetings last week, the percent of students that opt out of SBA, very small at elementary, goes up a little bit at middle, and at high school, it's between, I'm trying to remember, changes with the content area, but it's between like 6 and 9%. What I don't know is who those students are. And that would be really interesting information to know who is opting out and to be able to think about how that impacts our numbers. But really thinking about that for 10th grade, that's a pretty significant number of students that would opt out. And so there would be a 0 instead of a score there. So that would be a significant impact on us. But I think that's a really interesting question to dig into, who's where, and being able to look at that.
She's writing, so I'm just going to talk. Is that okay? I was just going to kind of follow up with that for an example. And I think in our meeting, I explained how my child, who is a complex learner, has received a grade. And it's most parents would not be happy about that grade in math, but I was thrilled because he is fully included in his math class. However, I did go back in and I looked and I saw that there was one of those letters. So he is, I believe, taking the SBA. So his score is counted here, but he is not counted as a grade. Does that make sense? So I think, is that kind of what you're talking about? It's not so much the SBA as it is why are there that decrease in the grades? And so I would think that would probably be my child, right? So yeah, just kind of curious. I noticed the same thing. So thank you for bringing that up.
So your question about the SBA thing, so when like last year when the juniors have to take the science test, I actually opted out. And I know that a lot of my peers who were sort of high achieving, very highly capable, all chose to opt out because they thought that the level of the test was not up to par with what they're capable of doing. And so they were like, this is a waste of time. They're like, I don't want to go to school that early to take a test that isn't challenging me intellectually. I don't know how big that number of students is. Maybe it's only 30 or 40 students, but I think that's interesting that highly capable students are not choosing to take these tests.
It's a significant number opt out. That's one of the reasons that we don't include 10th grade WCAS here, because it does not represent our students.
I had another
I forced
question.
my child to take it, sorry,
Oh, yeah.
because I told her I didn't want to monitor R2 and have her not be at standard.
So I was looking at, I don't remember what one of the slides were, but obviously there's a bigger decrease in the Hispanic, Latino, and then the Black and African American. And I don't know if you guys hold each student group or each race category to a different benchmark of proficiency level, or if they're all held to the same. Because on slide 13 all the way at the top, it says that targets are 85 to 95% of students achieving at level. Does students mean every single person in any race group, or students student groups, specifically each group?
Yes.
So the range of 85 to 95 is for the different categories. All students are held to that same standard within that category. So if the benchmark is 85%, it's 85% for all students.
Okay.
Good question.
Yep.
Yeah, I do have one. This is a question I actually should have asked in advance, so forgive me. The benchmark rankings for subgroups. Where can I? It's not in the appendix. We have it for all students, but where can I find? Is that OSPI on OSPI's website? Do you know? How we
I
compile
don't know. I can check with Tim Krieger and see what we can get for you.
The reason I asked the question is, I was just going back and looking at historical reports, and for students from low-income households, we've been consistently, I believe that's right, in that 6 to 8 range of our benchmark districts.
Yes.
And it's been a pretty, I think it has been a consistent versus, we're usually 2 or 3 for, and I was just kind of thinking to myself, I wonder what are those characteristics of district? Is it a function of, is it hard, for example, is it more difficult to be successful if you're in a wealthy school district if you're from a low-income family? Okay, I'll track that down though.
No, those are great questions, and you're right. That's an accurate observation that students from low-income households, we are consistently really between 7 and 9 with benchmarking with other districts, and that's something that is of concern and focus for us.
And hard to unpack why, right? It's just it's hard. Well, at least from sitting here, it's difficult to unpack why.
Yep.
Director Stewart.
Kind of a corollary to Director Liberty's comment. I wonder how the feeling of fitting in establishes for that group also, the low income and a high income district. And I wonder if that tracks in with their scores.
Yeah. I think that's a valid question. Okay, so that is the math story. So thinking, so Kelly hit a lot about the program around literacy, so I will hit highlights, but if there's any questions or anything you want to go deeper in, absolutely let me know. So she talked quite a bit about third grade ELA, and this is one where I think we definitely see positive gains here, and I'll call it specifically thinking about, again, students eligible for ML services. That's been a significant, consistent, positive place for us. And so one of the things that we do keep thinking about is what are the things happening with our ML students, with our ML teachers, that are things that we could think about as we're systematizing through the rest of the system, because that is something that's been really consistent. The state, I put this one in, so this is similar to some of the charts that you have after every indicator, is thinking about how our students do over time with different student groups. And with third grade ELA, you can see with our student groups that we, again, like we're still paralleling the state with somewhat of a trend line down since 2016. And I would remind you of that predictability score, where we are significantly above expectations, even though we look at it and think there's a lot of work that we want to do. That's where we're unpacking to get to different levels of data and thinking, what is our work with different student populations, and really celebrating that our teachers are doing some phenomenal work with kids. This is the same chart that Kelly showed you earlier, and again highlighting that our students from low-income households made significant growth. This is one of the few places that they made such jumps. And that N is just, again, really interesting. Like, there's about 1,000 kids missing from thinking about year-over-year work with them. Elementary literacy, you've heard a lot of what we're working on in K-5 literacy, K-3 literacy, are all the thinking about our system goal, looking at our annual trend growth for multilingual students, new resources coming in, looking at some increase in kindergarten, and again, thinking about that intensive professional learning for K2 safety and ML and special education teachers. That focus that Kelly talked about on small group instruction is really important. Like, that actually was a pretty major shift from 2 years ago, where small group instruction may not have been consistently happening, and so that shift to how are we really helping teachers think about the individual students, that mindset shift is well underway. With 8th grade ELA, we're actually really trending with the state. So our benchmarking is strong when we look at other districts for the most part. And this is an area that we're right along with the state in terms of our annual trend is a negative one, and the overall achievement of our students, especially comparatively, is relatively high. This is the work in middle school ELA has really been around, they have a relatively new resource, and so we've been focusing on scope and sequence and core learning for all of our students in middle school ELA, and being able to leverage using FastBridge more specifically. But that is more of a mindset shift for our middle school teachers in terms of thinking about how to be able to use that kind of data. In cohort data, we're again kind of looking at relatively like a slight trend line down, holding steady with some populations, trend line down with others. That's very similar to the state. And you can see that when you look at regionally, again, Mercer Island is the one that's ahead of us for the most part. And we're still paralleling impacts of COVID. And it gets harder to tell specifically what that is, other than students had missed some significant learning. In grade 10, this is an interesting one. This is where you look at R2 and you think, okay, there are more questions sometimes that I can answer. So we had a negative trend at 8th grade and we've got a positive trend at 10th grade. I'm not entirely sure what that means, especially in terms of looking at where we're benchmarking with ELA, that we're positive with the annual trend, and being able to think about the professional learning that our high school teachers need and our middle school teachers need to really focus in on literacy. And I think that's something I will totally confess as a former English teacher. I was an English teacher because I loved reading, which did not make me a great reading teacher. And so I think that's a learning for us to really think about how we provide that to our system intentionally and systemically. So, more embarrassing stories to tell you about that, but our cohort data, when we look at 7, 8, 9, we're seeing some slight trends up. So again, like looking at cohort data, it's difficult to tell what causes what, but it's really helpful to be able to look at, so how do we continue to have intentional focus with our students? So thinking about like our our 10th grade ELA teachers, our 8th grade ELA teachers, to think of, look, we're making some positive differences, but to be able to make it more intentional is really important for us. Our students from low-income households, again, this was a population that made significant growth. Other places that we did not, that are of concern to us, are thinking about our students of 2 or more races. And this is interesting that we didn't make the growth as we transition to middle school and high school. We're still having great practice with our ML teachers and with our students who are receiving ML services. And the students are coming in a really different place. Like to come into 8th grade ELA or 10th grade science is really different than coming into a 3rd grade classroom. So great practices, and I'll call out like some of the things that I think the board has seen, I've definitely seen on Learning Walks, is where co-teaching is happening and how that is really becoming stronger and stronger, and that like it's a challenge often to walk into a co-teaching classroom and know who the content teacher is and who's the ML teacher. That partnership and the structures to make the partnerships are getting stronger and stronger. So for secondary literacy, some of the things that we just recognize is that we're benchmarking at 2nd for grade 8, at 4th for grade 10. The cohort does show increase for most student groups for the cohort of 2028. That we're seeing some growth on the SBA in places that have been targeted, like where we're really thinking about supporting student growth. That our course grades, and I didn't have a slide in here, but it's in your report, but our course grades and credit show positive growth towards graduation, that we're really helping kids cross that line. And that we're continuing to think about the alignment and expansion of ELA instructional resources and lining that up with things like the instructional playbook with Universal Design for Learning, so that these are not separate things as students are experiencing learning. So, any questions, comments, thoughts on ELA? Secondary ELA?
Director Yoakum.
Can I go back to elementary ELA? Dr. As you had said earlier in the study session in regards to the elementary report card data that all students in elementary are being assessed at grade level standards. So do you feel that our efforts for special education inclusion practices might be in conflict with our goals of increasing the percentage of students reading at grade level?
Can you say that again so I make sure I've got it just right?
I know I wrote it down so I could read quickly. Do you feel that our efforts for special education inclusion, because now we have these students who are being assessed at grade level standards, right? Is that in conflict with our goal here in R2 of trying to increase that percentage of students reading at grade level? I think in the study session we had talked about like the annual trend for students receiving special education, and 3rd grade report card data is like down 6.6. So I think part of what you had said is because all students are now in the classroom being assessed at grade level standards. So just wondering, like, do those two things, can they occur at the same time, or are they a little bit in conflict?
So I think it's paramount to our duty as educators and as a district to include all students, and that our goal on R2 is that all students achieve at high levels, but it's not a goal in the abstract. It's not like our goal isn't just to have a high number on R2, it's that all of our students are included and learn at high levels. And R2 should reflect that. So we will continue to hold ourselves accountable to high standards and high levels of achievement, but every student should be part of that. And to say that they're in conflict, like there are terrible situations, and I'll also recognize that the board is really thoughtful about this, because there are many examples across our nation where people held a test score over integrity or over the student with dire consequences.
And I guess my concern is if we have R2 here and our goal is to have, greater than 90% in all of these areas, yet we know that we're not teaching in a segregated environment, not to standards, that might not be achievable ever or at certain times, like depending, again, it's potentially through the lens of me with my child, right?
and that's the story behind R2.
Yeah.
Those are the stories.
Just making, I just want to make sure that, and this might come up later, but thank you. I'll end it right there. Yeah, I think conflict was probably a bad word to use, but it's, yes, I believe everyone should be included. And I also feel like that might be why those scores are trending down because of inclusion. And then just to recognize that and that's not a bad thing.
Yeah, absolutely
Yeah.
not. I think, I mean, you and I were talking about this the other day, that we've done quite a bit of work with our teachers to really highlight that all students should be assessed against grade level standards. And that's really important. That's respectful to our students, and it's respectful to caregivers so that they have an understanding of where their students' learning is. And that might bring that might change how we're recording our report card grades, and that's totally fine. That the more integrity we have in our work, the better. And whatever that reflects, then we will understand that and unpack that and use that to guide our work. But it's really important to keep that integrity.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Director Guthrie?
Yeah, and building on that a little bit, like I think R2 is going to look really different for the grades in algebra next year. Not as, I'll put in quotation marks good, or potentially not as green, because that N is going to go up. And the number of students seeing success is going to go up, but maybe not at the same rate. So to clarify, like I, as a board director, I'm completely fine with that, because I think it's tying to another priority of the board. My question in this area, what are sort of the core skills for secondary ELA? That's sort of a broad question, but we just talked a lot about foundational skills at the elementary level. We've had algebra as sort of a guiding light through at least the first part of secondary. I'm having a harder time sort of visualizing, like what are the skills that looking at this data, that our students are maybe not acquiring at the ideal rate, or the rate that we would prefer, and what's some of the work being done to address that?
I think the standards for ELA. Really, Kelly was talking about this a little bit, or maybe we were talking about it in cabinet, that once the importance of K3 reading standards and that work is very foundational and different than when you get into the more critical thinking piece. You absolutely should be doing critical thinking K through 3, but those are, we were talking about it being like if you were learning discrete basketball skills, but then you put them together in the game. That's really like, as you're developing that fluency, that ability with literacy, like you're putting all the pieces together and you're able to respond to changing situations. Secondary literacy is really about critical thinking, communication skills in terms of expression, generally written expression, but also in terms of SBA, it's not going to be speaking. In a classroom, it'll be speaking. It is... I'm trying to pull the specific standards in. It's really asking students to be able to process different types of information, construct meaningful arguments or points out of it, and to be able to reflect that back. What's interesting is that that's not especially different than what the social studies standards ask either, or like the media literacy standards, that many of those standards are coming across. One of the things where I think would be helpful for us to look at secondary ELA is really diving back into those standards and looking at what they mean in terms of daily experience of our students. The curricular resources at secondary ELA are frequently, like I will again say as a former English teacher, the resource we adopted has an enormous amount of flexibility, lots of resources in it, but it's focused on literature, or it's focused on more academic writing. And I think what SBA calls out, and what I think is really valuable for our students, is continuing to think about what is that like active use of the ELA knowledge, the speaking, writing, critical thinking, communication pieces. So, and that's something that we've been more focused on understanding and delivering the scope and sequence of the curriculum, and then focusing in on to parallel from Kelly's point, we've identified what small groups are, and now how do they work most effectively? We've identified scope and sequence. What does that look like implemented most effectively? The piece that I'm excited about as we look at next year is thinking about the deepening implementation of student growth goals, and really thinking about the new Danielson framework, which really calls out students' engagement in their learning and that higher level of thinking that we want our students to do. So I've been in lots of English classes, and they're They're exciting. Kids are doing great things. I don't know that that shows up on SBA all the time. Like the skills are, I think great things are happening, and that alignment of how are we measuring them may not be there. So, and I'm remembering being at ICS with the board in December and going through some of the classes there. One of the ones I was just thinking of, I can't remember if it was ELA or social studies, but the teacher was reading a picture book to the class. It was just a phenomenal lesson that the kids were fully engaged, and I don't know where that would show up on SBA. So. Which one? Oh, maybe so. That definitely wouldn't show up on SBA, but it was really good. There's a lot of classrooms. Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so then shifting to science, if there's no more questions on ELA. Okay, so science is, we have a similar demographic, similar, and again, similar issues. I would say that in science, where we have focused our time, we focused our resources, we see some changes. Science in some levels has not had the same focus that it had in the past, and that's for a reason. We have only so many things we can do well at once, and so we pick what they are. So some things are maintenance, and some things we really focus on. Something that we've been doing, especially as we look at one of the components of R2, is making sure our students have the credits they need to graduate, and so we've been actively working with counselors to think about registration planning. We essentially didn't do much science instruction during COVID, and we really only got it rolling back in 22-23, so some of our students had some limited exposure to the units. Our high school department chairs have been awesome in aligning school level plans of action for thinking about course taking and diving into standards. We have additional resources for science, and what's exciting about some of the resources is that they're embedding computer science in them. Like Open Syed at the middle school is embedding computer science experiences into the resources, which is great. So this is one, fifth grade WCAS. This is one where we went from first to fifth by dropping 1.1% year over year. So this is one where I would say elementary science has been in maintenance mode, which means that we have resources for teachers, we have opportunities for professional learning, we've got ability to opt in to courses on Cornerstone or engage in collaboration. But this is one where when we adopted the resources and we've been focusing on really supporting literacy, this is one that we're excited, as Kelly was talking about, to think about how do we use the science kits that we have, which have a large digital presence. So the Amplify Science kits, even though we've got these discrete kits, the actual access to resources kids have are year-round, pretty much, for what's online. So we're excited to be able to do that integration. I would say we're kind of holding steady in fifth grade science. We went up some places, down some places, and that'll be something that'll be interesting to look at as we look at literacy as a way to transfer knowledge and not separating out, having the minutes argument of how many minutes do we spend on literacy, math, science, and social studies, and start being able to integrate the learning. For eighth grade, so eighth grade, our annual trend over years has gone down a bit, but our benchmarking is really high. One of the things that we've been doing at middle school is really investing in providing standards-aligned resources. So I've shared with you several times that we have been using Open Syed, which has been developed by OSPI, really bringing in a lot of outside resources and a focus on integrating climate science. And our teachers have been really excited to be part of that learning. They've been, we've had multiple cohorts go through multiple day learning, as well as book studies and collaboration. So this is one where the annual trend is more negative than positive. How our eighth graders are actually doing, I think, to some extent reflects that we've really been focused on standards-aligned instruction and supporting our teachers with that. For 10th grade, again, or in high school, WCAS we don't look at because you are not alone, Ella. Very few students take that test. So it's not a valid measure of what our students can do. So what we look at is really what are the indicators for our students being on track for graduation, which is our 10th grade students with a grade of C or higher in their 10th grade science course. And our students, I'd say we've really been holding steady. We have some more focus and work to do with these students. And a lot of that is thinking about, again, how we can leverage success with the groups of students that are furthest away from target and how that works in terms of course taking patterns and supporting them in classrooms. The other indicator we look at is students need three credits to graduate. So we look at the end of 11th grade, who has at least 2 credits and are on track to graduate. And overall, we're in really good shape. We could continue to look at that. And actually, we will continue to look at that because as we look at the shift in the high school day, our counselors right now are starting to do intensive planning for registration with our students. So this is going to be really important to track this for students with 2 or more credits in science. So this is also grade 11. So I wasn't able to get a percentage for you to know or number how many students didn't graduate because they didn't have 3 credits in science. But I think it's a fairly small number, but we can look at that as well. But this is our proxy for our students looking like they'll graduate. Through all of this, we are continuing to focus or I'll pause and before I've got just a couple slides for closing. Any questions or thoughts about science?
Director Guthrie.
And we're looking at 2 or more credits here as being on track to graduate. And there's also, they have to be 2 lab science, the third to be non-lab science. So if you're looking up how many students are not graduating due to failing to accrue 3 credits, it might also be interesting to look at if the lab science requirement is also a blocker.
Definitely. One of the things in 2409 that we put into place, the procedure for that is if students do take and pass WCAS, they can get a half credit. Just saying. Of science, but it's not lab science, so that's a good question.
Could you briefly clarify for grade 10 science, it says percentage of grade 10 students with grade of C or higher in 10th grade science courses. Is it only 10th graders who are taking 10th grade science courses?
So there's no such thing as a 10th grade science course. Tim had to go in and pull all 10th graders in whatever science they were taking.
In whatever science.
Yeah.
Okay.
The typical course pattern is biology in the Earth system, chemistry in the Earth system, and physics in the universe. So that's the typical, but it doesn't have to be. Like some kids will double up on science, or they'll take forensics, or they'll take something else. So this was just looking at, 10th graders, you should be taking science. How are you doing?
So if they're doubling up in science in 10th grade, is it counting both
I don't
classes?
know.
Okay.
I think that's a relatively small number, but we can find out. Okay. All right. Okay, so in all of these, we're just really thinking about how are we strengthening Tier 1? How are we really giving all students access? And then really intentionally thinking about what does Tier 2 look like for students who need additional support. We've been working with our building leaders around professional learning. Most of this you've already heard about. Instructional playbook, really supporting our building leaders to lead all kinds of professional learning. So the instructional playbook is a great example. They will have a session that they will lead with teachers, and Emily Young in the professional learning department will provide several alternate modules they can do if they want to deepen it, if they want to adjust it, but really thinking about how do we support our building leaders to be instructional leaders. We've partnered with teachers to implement student growth goals. We had teacher leaders in every building, providing differentiated learning both on demand and on monthly. And then the continuation of the principal learning communities, and then continuing to think about what's our deep collaboration between central office and building leaders, really thinking through the principal support framework to really focus everything on what makes a difference to students in classrooms. There's a lot of specific support for our multilingual learners, and I won't read this to you, it's in the PowerPoint, but these are all the different sessions that are specific for ML teachers, and then on the right are all the other sessions that all teachers have access to, either through Cornerstone or through cohorts or different learning mechanisms. We have the same type of intensity for our special services, so our special ed teachers have all the training that's on the left. All leaders and teachers have access to all the training that's on the right. And again, this comes in a variety of formats. It can be on demand, it'll be at strategic leadership, it'll be, we're working to provide, knowing how much professional learning's gone out to the buildings and to teachers, how do we provide menus of learning that teachers can have? Elementary focus, these are just kind of the highlights that we've talked through in thinking about each of the different content areas. I'll just pause for a moment. But these are all things that we're pulling it together between math and literacy and science. And the overall focus on Tier 1 instruction. Our middle school focus is really similar. We've just, when we move into secondary, we've got some more specific content area focus. And then high school is very similar as well. We're just, and it looks similar because we're just really focused on the instructional shifts and supporting teachers to be really powerful facilitators of learning in every classroom. And we come back to our systemic theory of action. If we do all of these things, we really focus in on instruction, and that's the thing that we do, and we keep our eyes very clear on student success, then we will make a difference to our students. And again, that's thinking about the bright spots of R2, the overhead lighting and the task lights, that it gives kind of the overall, paints a broad picture of what is happening in our system and gives us some very specific areas that we need to dig into, and then some things that we can celebrate as we focus on all of our students and thinking about equitable outcomes for all of them. And thinking about our goals for students, like what do we really want for the whole student? What do we want our students to experience as they go through our system and become as they leave our system? And we come back to thinking about MTSS, inclusion, and equity. Okay, questions, comments, thoughts, anything?
Thank you so much. Yeah. Any further questions? Nope. I think we asked them all during your presentation.
Okay. All right. So,
there might be one question.
Yeah, I got a half-baked question. I'm just going to go ahead and say aloud anyway. So when we've talked about early literacy, I think we've identified, like the board's collectively identified, third grade early literacy as sort of a priority and an area of focus when we're looking at this. For math, we've talked about 8th grade algebra as an area of focus. I'll be honest, like every report that I've had since I've been on the board, when I looked at science, I feel like we don't give it the same level of, I don't think I've given it the same level of attention as I have to the other dimensions. And I was staring at it this evening, I was thinking to myself, well, like if there were a focus within science, like what would that be? I mean, would it be 8th grade science? Because with that, I mean, I suppose we could make the argument that if students are at standard then they're in a position to be ready for the lab sciences in 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, success in those, maybe some student sees themselves more in the sciences as they go forward. I mean, how do we help me? How do we think about this?
So 3rd grade literacy, like we talked about, reading at 3rd grade is such a discrete set of skills that so much is contingent on that in all content areas. So that's why 3rd grade literacy. 5th grade math, we've picked because that's the entry into algebraic thinking, and again that has some of the discrete skills that if you're going to access the higher levels of math, like 5th grade's really important, and then 8th grade's really important to launch you into what do you have access to in high school. So science isn't necessarily the same type of discrete sets of skills. It's incredibly important, and it's important to start it early, but your math doesn't depend on your science skills necessarily. There's a relation to it, but your point about 8th grade, and I don't know that I have that actually in here, 8th grade grades is probably a really important one for science, or 8th grade WCAS, because I think a lot, and this isn't going to be research-based, this is thinking about your question. Our 8th grade students register for high school. They set up their entire high school plan based on their conception of themselves as an 8th grade student, which I think is profoundly, I don't know what word I want to put in there, kind of terrifying in some way, because I think to Ella's point earlier, I think how do our students view themselves? Do they see themselves as science learners, as math learners? Do they see themselves as potentially going to college? And they're registering as 8th graders for that. So I think looking at at how our students are doing in science at 8th grade, or how they are scoring, and thinking about how do we have them have a disposition for science. And that's really core to NGSS. Like, NGSS talks a lot about every person should see themselves as a scientist and be excited about it. And that's one of the key points in our system where we could measure, are they really, like, do they have the skills, and are the grades reflecting back our students both feel and are proficient in science. So that's my opinion. It doesn't have quite the research behind it that 5th grade math or 3rd grade literacy does, but I think that's some of the work that we think. Okay,
yeah.
thank you. Appreciate that. Yeah,
Yeah,
but
makes sense to me.
I've been thinking about that, forever and ever. Like, what do our 8th graders have such? Who they think of themselves
Yeah.
as at that moment in time has profound impact on the entire rest of their lives.
Yeah, that's
And
right.
so, that's one of the things I love about no pressure, our math pathways, is it just resets that for students. And that's what we're hearing and seeing, is students are going, I actually can do this. I never would have thought this of myself, and I can do it. Like, that's powerful. So I think about that with anything that happens at these key moments of how are we as a system, what tools are we putting in place so that, and I know this is happening, our high school counselors are working with our 8th graders to say, dream, what do you want to be? You love science, you love robotics, you've been in Kevin Hakes Miller's class, it's awesome. Take classes based on your conception of yourself as someone who loves robotics.
Thanks. I'm glad I asked that half-baked question. I like the answer. Thanks.
Any other questions? Okay.
Can I make one last comment? Sorry.
course.
I just want to recognize, I want to thank Tim and his team for this part in the report, but I also just want to recognize, like, all of those data points that went into it are individual students, and just what incredible work that they've done. Like, with all of the different things that have gone on over the years that these children have been in school, that our teachers have just done a phenomenal job to keep us all, like, looking at all this data. I'll just ask you to remember those 2 charts at the beginning that show, based on demographics, what expectations would be and how far above them our teachers have taken our students. So just want to recognize and thank them.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rose.
Yeah.
Are we interested in a break? All right. Before we continue on to our discussion, I think we'll go ahead and take a 10-minute recess. We will be back at 9:02. Thank you, everyone. We'll go ahead and resume our meeting. It is the board's responsibility to consider the report and data provided as evidence of reasonable progress with noted exceptions for results too. I will now entertain a motion to approve the monitoring report as presented.
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved by Director Liberty and seconded by Director Yoakum to approve the monitoring report for results two. Is there any further discussion? Director Liberty.
Yes. Would we have everyone? Everyone's here. I feel like we're short. I guess it's Mark's. Okay. Okay, I'll proceed. I don't remember in the pre-meeting I had with staff, I don't remember whose idea it was, except I know that it wasn't mine, that have, for the monitoring report, it's a lot to digest for R2 in one, and having a sort of at the top, even I'm just sort of envisioning at the top, a report out of the key metric, I don't know, key metrics is probably not the right term, but if we have some highlighted, like the board has identified some highlighted metrics, having that focused at the top of the report, I think would be helpful. I know we've talked about, we talked earlier about early literacy, third grade, algebra. I think what Dr. Rose was talking about earlier about about grades students receive in 8th grade science is interesting as well. I'm not sure I would elevate that yet, but just I guess again the concept I would like to see in future monitoring reports elevating in terms of structurally a handful of metrics. And if the board is if the board is on board with that with that idea, I do think identifying something from science to elevate would be a good idea. And so I would, if the board is wanting to do that, I think that I would ask Dr. Holman to propose an indicator for science to sort of elevate that top section as the area of focus. And I again, what Dr. Rose said, I bought on 8th grade grades.
Any other discussion? Eric has more he wants to say.
Well, I think, okay, I just have one more comment, and because I think it's important to say so loud. I mean, it remains, I think troubling is the right word, that our district continues to be, in terms of the benchmarks, at the lower end of our benchmark districts for students from low income households. So I think I know there's a lot of work to that. I know there's a lot of intention behind it. And I think it's important to be clear about that and to highlight that in our summary.
I think in response to both parts of Director LaLiberty's comments, I almost feel like there's value in, like, rather than having a focus area summary of like literacy by 3rd grade, algebra by 8th grade, and then a metric for science, I would actually prefer a focus area like potentially focusing on our students from low-income households, and then having results specifically associated with the work being done to try to change that trend being a focus, if that makes sense. Like highlighting the work that is specifically being done to try to change the results, the consistent results we're seeing for like a particular demographic group. And then in an ideal world, because I know we're going to fix this after 1 year and they're going to be doing amazing, we would move to different focus areas each year as we evaluate, or stick with one. Director Yoakum.
Okay, this is just kind of my thinking after all of this, and it's probably not going to be very much in line with others. So I'm kind of going back and focusing on the first line of that, the first sentence of the policy. It's each student will demonstrate mastery of content knowledge, skills, and competencies necessary to create, collaborate, think critically, and solve problems. So in my mind, I sort of broke this into two parts. Kind of like what R2 to me was measuring, which was that content knowledge, skills, and competencies, and the intended long-term outcomes, which is sort of like that second part. That is how I read it in my head. So kind of through FastBridge, SBA scores, report card grades, we assess mastery of content knowledge, skills, and competencies. And then the phrase to me, necessary to, suggests that achieving mastery in these areas should naturally lead to the ability to create, collaborate, think critically, solve problems. So I believe that we all value high achievement scores because of the assumption that the strong academic performance translates into these broader skills, like that second part. And just as Dr. Rose had said, R2 is used as sort of as a proxy for students' ability to create, collaborate, all of that. But I have thoughts and questions, and again, there's nothing, I just kind of wanted to say this, just my thoughts and questions. Is there clear evidence that content mastery leads to the ability to create, collaborate, think critically, and solve problems? And how do we measure that connection? And even if this connection holds for many students, does it apply equally to students in demographic groups where we're working to close the gaps? I just believe we're committed to ensuring long-term outcomes for all students, and if that's the case, we must be intentional about what it really means to raise scores and improve percentages. Just thoughts. Kind of going back to that, what I talked about, is it in conflict with inclusion, right? Like if we're going to be increasing scores of our students receiving special ed services, is that going to occur more in a segregated environment, more so than it would in an inclusive environment? So I don't know. Just thoughts. That was all I wanted to say.
Director Stewart.
Yeah, going back to the low income, I'll hark back to when I was in junior high, and there was a large high income development that went in about a half mile from us, and I was put on the bus with all these kids with big wallets, and it was intimidating. And I knew a couple other kids that had been in the area before these high-priced homes went in, and they were intimidated. And it took a while to assimilate. And so I'm wondering if we need to start looking at how our perceptions of fitting in for these students have an impact on their academics, and what we can do to boost that. And now, maybe that's a bigger issue than we can attack, because maybe it's more societal than it is district, but it sure would go a long way to making those kids a better life, I think.
Director Lola.
I have thoughts on what you said. No, Director Yoakum. It's interesting. I was staring at the policy language, and I think I can draw a link between the content knowledge and being able to collaborate, think critically, all that. But it's interesting, when I was just thinking about this now, we also measure those directly in R3 as the sort of interpersonal skills that we have in there. So it's kind of interesting, because when when I think about R2, I really am thinking about the academic program and content knowledge and skills. And so I appreciate you saying that, because it's the first time in a while that I've actually thought about, honestly, the exact language that's in there. And that is a little bit different than how we actually monitor R2. And I'm not saying we should monitor R2 differently. I'm actually wondering whether this language is consistent with how we are monitoring R2 right now. And if pressed, I could draw a link between everything we monitor in R2 and those words. So it's interesting. All right. So anyway, you asked for thoughts. Those are my 3 minutes later, my thoughts.
Director Yoakum.
That's interesting.
Respond to that really quickly.
Sure.
I think I go back to one of the committee meetings when it was the strategic plan. I think it was one of the first few, and I remember, I don't know who I spoke with, but it was the board policy drives the work of the district. And I remember looking at this creation of student, staff, organization profile, and I was like, I feel like the profile is going to be driving R2. That it was sort of the work that you're doing around that student profile, what we want from our students when they're graduating, felt like, if that's, again, I guess I'm trying to wrap my head around, and maybe it's because I've been in the teacher world where it's hard to split out, like nothing in that profile specifically focuses on math scores, reading scores, science scores. And yes, I understand that we're using that as this proxy of success in those areas. But I just feel like if we're moving towards that of what we want in our students, like, does R2 make sense? I don't know. I'm just trying to make sense of this if we're moving towards that. But that's just hard for me to wrap my head around at that higher level.
I think for me, ultimately, this is still school and education and a goal of academic learning and knowledge acquisition. And so I think they're not mutually exclusive, but I guess I'm struggling with kind of what you're saying, because I almost feel like you're saying that the like academic knowledge is irrelevant to to education.
No,
which I don't like. Could you explain?
No, I think it's that. I think it's really okay. So at the top, that like that policy, that first sentence, like, I believe all of that. Yes, each student will demonstrate this knowledge necessary to do these things. And I think that necessary to do these things is, to me, kind of how I view that student profile, right? And in order to do all of those skills, whatever we have written in that profile, that we do need mastery of content, knowledge, skills, and competencies in order to be able to do this. I guess I'm just seeing, I have a hard time looking at, like, how does SBA measure collaboration? How does FastBridge measure collaboration? Like, yes, it is a proxy, but yeah. So again, not wanting to change anything. This is just like what I'm internally struggling with this policy.
I think that's like a really good, like, that's the tension that there's always been between a grade and a class, right? When teachers, when there was differentiation between like what you score in a test, but then class participation and project submission and homework, and there was a effort to say, or there was an assumption being made that like you getting a good grade on a good project means that you can collaborate and work with other people. You being able to, you had some complex problem that was a homework assignment that you had to figure out and turn in, and that's you applying the knowledge that you got in the lesson to a problem, thinking critically. And so I think the proxy kind of for measuring some of this stuff is the grade in the class versus, and I mean, you could even make the same as, you can make the leap, I think, even with assessments, that like certain questions, depending on how they're written, is an extension of, yes, mastery of content, but then application of it to being able to answer, like make the connection and the leap then to answer this question. So I don't think there's a clear, this shows collaboration and you're creative and but this is the most consistent data source that we have, even though it's imperfect. Do you have recommendations or thoughts on like something that we could include or substitute?
No, I just wanted to share that. That's what I'm struggling with. And I do think that it also, in looking at our students in specific demographic groups, right? Like I just, if we're, for example, like I opt my child out of taking the SBA because he is a creative thinker and a critical thinker and a collaborator and solves problems, but that won't be representative in that score. And what that might do for his mental health to see that score, if that's not what is being evaluated, is a struggle. So I find value in knowledge skills where like you think about the academics and then these other, like, to me, the things that aren't so easy to evaluate. But if he gets a poor score because of like maybe learning disorders, right? That's going to then, are we going to make this assumption that he is lower because maybe he has special education, he's one of those students that he can't then in the future be able to create, collaborate, think critically, or solve problems. I guess it's that, it's almost like if this, then this, but some kids can't, but they still can do this. Does that make sense? Like it just kind of what I wanted to say. Not that I have recommendations at all. I just wanted to, what I'm struggling with this.
Director Guthrie.
Yeah, I struggled with something similar when looking specifically at the secondary results for multilingual students currently receiving multilingual services, which are grim. Like let's be honest, like they're some of our lowest results across the system. And from a numbers perspective, they're grim. I can't begin to imagine how difficult it must be to launch into a high school chemistry class, not being a native English speaker, to the point where I've been identified and I'm receiving services and try to meet standards. I think to Director Yoakum's point, does that mean that I can't, I don't have all the words, collaborate, think critically, problem solve, and create? No, maybe I struggle to do that in English, but that's a student who's achieving in some ways. And perhaps, so as I went through this report, I had a hard time thinking about like my definitions of success are probably different from those students. I'm guessing, and just not being able to really wrap my brain around it and understand that. Maybe some of it gets back to what Director Choi was saying of diving in perhaps to some different groups or doing some deeper understanding of some of these experiences that right now, as much as I love 126 pages of R2, doing the overhead lighting of are we generally on track, but then digging in a little bit more to some of these different groups and trying to more deeply understand those experiences, because I cannot even begin for that secondary multilingual specifically. I can't even begin to articulate. Like I have like literally no clue about that experience and cannot sit up here and even try to say, oh, maybe we should look at this or look at that. But I just know that I don't understand that experience deeply enough. And I don't think the numbers in here today are necessarily reflective of that. So I think there's an interest in I think I'm hearing a general interest in different ways and in different places of just thinking about how we consider our academic results, just thinking about it a little bit differently from what we've got today. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think I concur, and I might phrase it a little bit differently in that we're fortunate in this district that we have a significant majority of our student population that we can categorize as successful in their academic content acquisition. So we're at almost 80% literacy rate for R1 or 2.1. And year over year, we see the same kind of demographic subgroups that aren't achieving at the same level as our all student success levels. And so in order to move the needle for specific demographics, I think focusing on them makes the most sense so that we can dig in deeper and figure out like what works and what might not work for any given group. Like what is working for our multilingual students right now might not work for our Hispanic students or our low-income students or whoever the group is that we focus on. I see nodding heads, so I think we concur.
Yeah, and that might get to some of Director Yoakum's interest of if we're deep diving on one of these groups, we can start to understand, yes, I hesitate to say the problem with this group, especially because again, we're talking about students here, but is this a group that is really not seeing success? Like, can we be honest about that? Like, if they're not gaining the skills to create and collaborate and think critically and problem solve, then that's one set of problems. If we dig in and we discover, hey, actually they are developing these skills, we just aren't measuring it appropriately with our current mechanisms, then we can have that conversation. But that deeper understanding and yeah, focusing in on particular students who are popping right now in this data.
Director Yoakum.
Sorry, I was going to say, I'm sorry. I think I'm struggling with the students who are not successful, because I think that's part of this issue is we're determining success by grades and scores, right? Like I think just I understand, yes, that's part of it, but is that the only way we define success? I don't think it is, but I think in what I'm hearing, that's sort of how we're defining success right now.
I don't only define success as like reaching a threshold of a percentage. I like when we look at the data, we talk about trends, if it's an upward trend or a downward trend, if like the general overall trend for the student body is a positive trend, but then we have a vast negative trend for the subgroup, right? Like I consider that.
So it's improvement. Success is improvement. Is that?
If that is, if there is a larger majority of the student body that is showing improvement, and then one group is not, then I would be concerned that something isn't working, right? And so then we need to dig in to see what's going on. So yeah, I understand like defining success as like a grade is really hard for lots of different reasons, but I don't think that that's the only thing we're looking at. And I agree, we should continue to evaluate if there are different metrics that are more valuable.
I like the superintendent interpretation of this policy that we've been talking about, which is I think actually credit to whatever superintendent drafted that, is closer to, I think, what the board's intention is for the monitoring this policy. And that is, it says, every student will demonstrate academic achievement to their fullest potential and be equipped with the ability to successfully apply their learning in multiple settings. And to me, that is what R2 is, and that's how I think it's how we are monitoring and how I'd like to see it continued monitored. And I think the second half of what is in the policy is important to monitor as well. And I think we monitor it in R3. So I really actually appreciate the discussion. It's been interesting, both practically and intellectually, to go through it. And but I guess I wouldn't want to change how we're monitoring R2. And I agree with everything Director Yoakum said. And so I'm glad we finally recently, I think, got R3 right, and that we are now monitoring those things in a way that makes sense. Can I start a new paragraph for my comments?
Can you first indicate if you're proposing that we change this language or not?
No, I can live with it. I mean, as long as the superintendent's interpretation of what we did is right to me. So I'm fine with that if that's how he's interpreting it, he or she. So no, I don't think the board needs to change the policy language. If the superintendent changes their interpretation, then I would want the board to change the policy language. I think I was just realizing I started my comments on this with pointing out an area of concern. I do think it's important that our report highlight the successes our summary highlight the successes of the report. Because there's a lot of great work, and you look at the district's achievement levels, it continues to be extraordinarily high, looking at particularly against the benchmark districts, and there's some positive trends, particularly in math, that I think shows a lot of great work. So I want to make sure that that's called out and highlighted in the summary. And I apologize for leading with the negative this evening, trying to make a practice of not doing that.
I had something for the summary. I had a question for the board. Going through, sorry, I'm just trying to think how I want to phrase this. Going through kind of the math data, we have an indicator, which is the SBA for 8th grade. And knowing the trajectory that we have been on and will continue on, which is a goal of all 8th graders taking Algebra 1 by 8th grade, that is not the math that is assessed on that test. The majority of 8th graders will be taking Algebra 1 or geometry in 8th grade, and so they might be 1 to 2 years removed from the math that is being assessed in SBA. And so I'm just curious, I would imagine that you will see a continued decrease in quote-unquote success on the SBA for 8th grade math, potentially. And I'm wondering if that data is still data that we would want to continue to see. Thoughts?
I think I'm not ready to commit to changing it right now. I think it's a really important call out as we start moving into these next few turns for R2 are going to be changing year over year as we get more and more students who have been through the PLUS pathways, and it's just going to take a few years to play out. I mean, another possible outcome is that today a lot of our students do completely skip 8th grade math because the pathways were reworked to address 8th grade math standards basically in 7th grade. But the students who we've seen coming through, a lot of them have been accessing Algebra 1 or geometry as 8th graders, and haven't touched on the 8th grade standards at all formally. So like it could go either way, and I think if we're coming back in 2 years and we're like, oh yeah, these SBA scores have really taken a nosedive, I think that's a very reasonable conversation to have. I'm not sure I'm quite at the point right now to say I think that we should change this indicator. So that's my opinion.
I guess the reason I was asking was I was curious, like what information does that provide if we continue? And for me, that's like retention of math that you did a year or 2 years before, which, yeah, maybe that's something that we want to continue to look at. But like in terms of, we do have a tendency to like compare the data that we get in like this report in particular, where we're looking at like SBA data and then we're looking at grades for 8th grade math, which is Algebra 1, and like now you're comparing all different types of math and assessment and grade. Like it's just like, I think it'll change how how we're interpreting and looking at the data for specifically 2.2 if we keep it in there for 8th grade. But yeah, that's kind of was my question.
Dr. Ullman, may I ask you a question about that? Is that okay? Question about our students in full-time, highly capable programs. Do they take their grade level SBAs or do they take their math level SBAs?
So SBA is a grade level,
Mm-hmm.
so there is no geometry SBA. And so last year our 8th graders that were in geometry, 97% of them passed the SBA.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm sorry. I'm thinking about like elementary in math as well. Like, so they're just taking grade level even though they are, okay.
Yes.
Okay.
So if you're in full-time Quest as a 4th grader, you don't take the 5th grade SBA.
Any other discussion for R2? Director Guthrie.
Yeah, I wanted to call out some positives as well. And I guess a little bit of story time, if you'll indulge me. I was driving with my daughter a couple months ago, my 4th grader, who I mentioned earlier today, striving reader, and she. Her SBA score, I had to laugh because I was really hoping all of the amazing work that had happened in this district, all the teachers who have invested so much in her and have believed in her. And I was really hoping, you don't put all that much stock in SBA scores, but I was hoping she would tick into the, up to level 3 or level 4 as a 3rd grader, and that I wouldn't have to monitor R2 and see her there as not being at standard. She hit the cutoff score, so I looked it up. She was literally at the cutoff between level 2 and level 3, which is really actually pretty incredible for this particular kid and the challenges she's overcome. So anyway, I was driving with her just a few months ago. This is long after, and she's gotten to the point with reading where like you're driving around and you're driving down a familiar road and she's reading all the signs to me like out loud, which like it was like we were driving down a new road. We were like on 148th Avenue and she's like, I've never been here before, because all of a sudden there's all these words that I can make sense of. And I was like, you're becoming a really great reader. And she's like, yeah. And she said, I didn't think I'd ever be able to read. And you could tell by her tone of voice that her belief in herself was changing. So that is a street data point. I really appreciate Dr. Holman and Dr. Rose, the way that you've set this up of these are individual students. Because yes, she's one of those ends. And that is her story. Part of her story. No, it's not actually her story. It's a very long story. I won't go into it all. But I think when I look at the graph that Dr. Rose showed, where Lake Washington's that yellow dot, I looked at the actual numbers. We're expected to have about our 50% of our 3rd graders reading at grade level, and we actually have 75%. Like that's a whole nother kid So you walk into my kid's class, and you pull out her and 3 of her classmates, and one of those classmates is not supposed to be reading. And they are, because they're here in Lake Washington. My point here is, I do actually have a point here. Making people cry is not actually the goal, but I did actually tear up when I saw that line in R2 for the cohort analysis for the class of 2033. And looking at the students from low-income households line and seeing going from 48% to 60%. We talk about closing achievement gaps, and I think sometimes it almost becomes like just sort of a trope of like, of course, yes, we should do it. Like, we closed an achievement gap for those kids. The overall trend line went up by like 3 points, and our students from low-income households, which, yes, should absolutely be a focus because their results, we know that they aren't where they need to be. But we did close a gap. There are the students who we've had all along, and gosh, we didn't talk about it, but that class of 2033, those kids were going through kindergarten and first grade in the heart of COVID. Those kids were doing kindergarten online. I saw what that looked like. Teachers were doing their absolute best, but it was not what we want for literacy instruction in this district. I think that's a fair thing to say. And even first grade, like that was a rough year, and that's when those kids should have been developing these foundational skills, and we still closed achievement gaps. Just like my daughter, you could hear the belief in herself change, and it's showing up in school, it's showing up in her confidence, it's showing up in her belief in herself and all of these things. And now her reading is getting better because she believes in herself. And I hope, despite all of this, that we still believe, because I know we believe as a board, and I hope everybody throughout this district believes that we can continue to close achievement gaps for our students, that we're moving in the right direction. We're going to get up tomorrow morning. I know, I talk all the time with the teachers in reading advisory, and I hear how the students who aren't achieving success yet weigh on them, because they bring that into that room. And so I know we're going to get up tomorrow morning and we're going to focus on that other 40% of our low-income, now fourth graders who aren't where they need to be, and we're going to keep working on them. But I hope that we can just take a moment tonight to really recognize the incredible work that's happening through this district. Knowing that it's not just my kid who's driving around with their parents, seeing signs. There are many kids in this district who are able to do that, regardless of what their SBA scores say and everything, because of the work that's been going on here. So that is my very long-winded commendation, but I think it's really important to say. And thank you, to everybody, like literally all the way up to this board before I was even on it, that believed in my kid, because it really does make a difference.
How can anyone follow that? Is there anything else that anyone wanted to add for the summary? Yes, Dr. Holman.
The questions tonight about create, collaborate, think critically, and solve problems. It makes me wonder, do we want to spend time measuring things like that to the degree that we could with confidence say X% of students know how to create? I think there's other levers that this board can pull that get to that interest. It's when you have a curriculum adoption and it's being presented. It's how are the curriculum that we're adopting actually lead to strategies, opportunities for students within the curriculum to create, collaborate, think critically, and solve problems. It's the instructional playbook. How does that help demonstrate how teachers are taking any content and working towards these, which we know are life skills? These are the skills that industry, business and industry require, that their workers come with. And so when you're on school visits, is a great time to be able to see these things in practice or not. and then to be able to question how are we ensuring that as students are learning this content, but they're doing it in this manner. Because you can sit and you can read a book and you can answer questions and you can demonstrate knowledge, but it's not demonstrating knowledge through interacting with peers and developing and analyzing. And so the how you're demonstrating and learning the knowledge and skills, I think, is really, really important. And there's lots of different ways that we can see that in our schools, but the board also has agency around things like curriculum adoptions. Like, that's a really, really important aspect to the board's work. And so maybe as we think about curriculum adoptions, it's making sure that we bring this kind of language to those conversations with the team that is presenting, so that they're demonstrating. I think about the elementary social studies curriculum that was most recently adopted. That team demonstrated to the board, create, collaborate, think critically, and solve problems. I mean, they really talked about how that curriculum leads to students interacting with one another, problem solving together. And so I think there's other ways for the board to see this and evaluate that as we've talked about how do OEs show up in the results to a much greater degree. And maybe this conversation really is the springboard to get us to the place where we're talking more about these areas which trying to measure creativity. I mean, we all, like, that's really difficult, and we also know how important that is. So I know we've talked about, different methods of thinking about monitoring. I also want to, as we think about possibly monitoring differently and possibly at the subgroup level, want to be cautious that we're doing that with eyes wide open, that we talk with our equity and family engagement team about, make sure that we do it in a manner that is honoring, respectful, not othering. Those are all the things that I worry about as we focus on, in Lake Washington, what are really small student groups. And so just want to be thoughtful about how we proceed in that manner as well.
Thank you, Dr. Holman. I can't remember who motioned and seconded. Thank you. It has been moved by Director Liberty and seconded by Director Yoakum to approve the monitoring report for results 2 as reasonable progress with noted exceptions. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye.
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 All those opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Thank you so much. A special shout out to Dr. Rose and Tim Krieger for all of the work that went into this report. The next item on our agenda this evening is the superintendent report. I was almost said the Dr. Holman report. Dr. Holman.
Yes. My comments tonight, I don't have a presentation for the board tonight, but my comments are in alignment with Director Yoakum's comments related to her trip, somewhat. And I want to start by sharing that last week at our district leadership team, my team developed, I'll say, an experience so that all of our district leaders really spent time working with, talking about, identifying successes and opportunities for continued focus related to OE14. And they spent about 2 hours going through that. I was ill, so I was not there, so I can't articulate everything that went on. And really what that experience was about was centering our students, centering their experiences, and that ongoing commitment that each and every student in Lake Washington deserves excellence. And I wanted to start with that because my comments tonight are really about, and it's not a judgment of executive orders coming out and those kinds of things. It's really about our responsibility as an organization is, regardless of the conditions, regardless of the variables, our responsibility is always to center our students. We can argue about the policies and the decisions and things like that, and at the end of the day, our goals don't change for kids. Like, that is consistent. We talked about all of our academic goals tonight. This is just one set of goals that we have for students. And so our responsibility is to continue to center our students, center their experiences in our schools, their experiences in our communities, and at times you will see me say things publicly. Because for me, when and I know when things are said on a different level than what we have control over. That can be at the state level, the federal level. It can be global experiences. And there's times that I will say things. Over the last couple of weeks, there's been some action at the federal level that I know has caused anxiety, fear, wonder, questions for our students, our community. We're asking some questions related to funding. And so I just wanted to bring into this space just kind of a commitment that as we walk through any of these kinds of changes, that we will continue to center our students. I sent out a message related to immigration on January 24th. And one of the things we knew was that with some of the recent announcements and changes, that created fear for our students and our schools. And so we took time to look at our policies related to, very specifically, immigration enforcement efforts. And with some of the changes related to where that takes place, it became a school issue real quick. And so we took a look at our policy, updated that, and thought about how do we honor the change in terms of the legal requirement, but how do we do it in a way that does our best to provide a layer of protection for our students and our schools. And if you read our policy related to that, it really is about, if that were to take place on our school campuses, our central office is who then gets involved to interact, verify, make sure that the legal requirements are in place. Take that off of our schools, because that's a burden that would be significant. And so our policy really does direct our schools to work with central office. We trained our administrators on that new policy. Will it happen? We have no idea. But we feel better prepared today. In the message that I sent out, we developed a set of, I'll just call them talking points, principles, related to students. There's some key points that most people don't know about because it's not talked about a lot, but as a school system, we're actually not allowed to ask about immigration status. And so, to be honest with you, we don't know if students are undocumented. And because our obligation, and this has been verified by the U.S. Supreme Court, our obligation is to educate every student that lives within the boundaries of Lake Washington School District. And so that is actually, for me, that's almost comforting, because we don't need to worry about that aspect of it. If a student is within the attendance area of Lake Washington, our commitment is that they will receive an excellent education. There's this other factor that we know that we needed to address, And so again, in this instance, it was about centering our students, building a layer of support for our schools in the case of should something like that happen. Another comment I put in my message to the community is that there's also a prohibition on our community resource officers asking about immigration status. That's a very specific prohibition. Our CROs haven't, but I just thought it was important just to put that out there so that our community knows that as well. And so, again, centering our students. We also know that the current administration put out information related to Title IX. And there has actually been, I'll say, changes already occurring with Title IX. There was rules in 2024 that were already in court. Those had been previously challenged. So the rules for Title IX really reverted back to the 2020 rules. And for many states across the country, that's a substantial shift and change. The state of Washington actually has protections already codified related to gender and whatnot. And so for Washington State, going back to the 2020 rules, it really doesn't make a significant change. So that's the Title IX piece. We also know that there was the issue of participation in sports. And you may have seen Superintendent Reichdahl's comments about that. We know there's going to be legal challenges related to that. And how that plays out, it will be what it is. And at the end of the day, our responsibility is to center our students. And so I always think about, okay, let's say there is a change. Well, we have students right now that would have to make a change in their participation. And being thoughtful about how we engage with our students, how we partner with them, how we, offer them dignity and respect, that is really, really important in any of these. And so I know there's a lot of unanswered questions related to that even today. And so as our state Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction, the Attorney General's office works through this related specifically to Washington State, because our laws are different than maybe our neighbors, in a different state. And so that's really a unique balance that I can't predict what's going to happen, but I know it will play out in the courts. But I want to maintain the dignity and honor of all of our students through these processes. The other question that I've been getting more and more over the last couple of weeks, and I printed off the executive order because I haven't sent anything out to the community, but I thought I would talk about it tonight. The order is titled Expanding Educational Freedom and Opportunities for Families. And so that's the title of the order. And the questions I've received are really about, well, does this change anything for Lake Washington School District? And so as I dug into the order, much of what the order is really direction to agencies to come up with plans within a 60 and 90-day window. And so, again, the order provides a lot of, I'll say, information and commentary, but there's not really anything actionable in it today because it's really directed an agency to come up with, guidance, like the idea of educational choice. And I've received many emails already saying, oh, does this mean you're going to open more choice schools? And so there may come a point in time where we have to provide education to our community around what does this word choice mean? Related to the state of Washington, specifically related to Lake Washington School District, since we call some of our schools choice schools. And I understand that confusion and why parents would be asking those questions. There was also within this order grant programs to expand education freedom for America's families and teachers. And these are things that it's like they're so ambiguous right now, and I know people want answers to it, but most of these things are really, study it. The next one is about expanding opportunities for low income and working families. It's another grant program, but within the middle of the text it says regarding whether and how states receiving block grants can use those block grants. And so it's really, the determination hasn't even been made about whether or not they can use funds in this regard. So I share all of this to say there's a lot out there right now. There's a lot of content. For me, I like to go to the source, work to understand it from there. If we have legal authority over the thing, then we take action on it. And at the end of the day, my commitment is we will always center our students in all of these actions and activities. If there's legally required changes, we will center our students and work through those processes. But I view a lot of this in a very pragmatic way because most of what we've heard related to potential funding changes, potential changes to even the Title IX changes, excuse me, there isn't a lot that is actionable today. And so, but for our community, for this board, just know that anytime there's either a change, an announcement, an order, we evaluate that to understand what impact there is here locally, if we have decision-making authority, if there's an actual requirement for change. We work with our legal counsel around these things, and the guidance that we receive from OSPI and the AG's office helps guide our work as well. So, thanks.
Thank you very much, Dr. Holman. The next item on our agenda is school visits and community affairs. Are there any updates from the board? Yes, Director Guthrie.
The Lake Washington Schools Foundation Board of Directors met last week. They heard a presentation from Johnny Fu about the Care Solace Partnership, which is a partnership for Lake Washington being funded in part by the foundation as well as the city of Redmond. And so there were some outcomes and some data that Johnny shared around that. And I answered some questions about sort of what's going on at the local, state, and national level. Very much actually forwarded Dr. Holman's communications because not all of the trustees are necessarily don't necessarily they're not all parents, so they're not all necessarily getting those communications through our typical channels. But yeah, definitely some questions and concerns there. But they were very grateful. I actually received a couple of responses, just sort of thank you for that work and for those communications and for continuing to center our students. Yeah.
Thank you. Anyone else? Next, we have committee updates. Any board members with any updates from any committees since our last board meeting? I know I will have one at our next, but I don't have any for this time. Then we will go ahead and the board will next plan on meeting on March 3rd with this is going to be a slightly different format for the board meeting in this study session. We are going to actually have our board meeting at 5 p.m. It is going to be a truncated meeting. There will be no public comment, and it will be mainly to approve the consent agenda. And if we have any announcements that we have to do, we will go ahead and do it at that board meeting. It will be followed by the study session at 6 p.m. This study session is going to be a joint study session with the Redmond City Council. Just because of the nature of the facilities and the rooms in this building, we are going to have to host it in this room, which is why we're changing the format of the day. So heads up to anybody who was planning on potentially attending that meeting that it's a changed format is all. I will go ahead and entertain a motion to adjourn the February 10th, 2025 board meeting.
So moved.
Second.
It has been moved by Director LaLiberty and seconded by Director Guthrie that we adjourn. All those in favor, please signify by voting aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, hearing none, motion carries. The meeting is adjourned at 10:03 p.m. Thank you, everyone.
Bye all.
See you, Mark.
Have fun.